Muted.
Because I'm one of the hostesses.
All right, we're gonna get started here. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will get them answered after our main presentation. The format for today's meeting is we have a few quick announcements. We have a short section of our meeting we call the Atheist Minute, where we introduce a member of our community to tell us something about their atheist identity or experience. And then we go into our main presentation today. We have an incredible speaker I'll announce in a second. And then once that speaker has completed their presentation, there will be time for Q&A. This will be a moderated Q&A, so we ask that you put your questions into the chat and then I will read them to the speaker. We find that managing 50 microphones at once is quite a challenge, and so instead we will use our technology to its full advantage and make this a smooth transition. If we have time afterwards and our speaker would like to hang out, you're welcome to hang out afterwards for the Hereafter party with the Godfather of Fun. One of our members, Klaus, will be leading a social after the main presentation. With that, let's start today's presentation. So we have an incredible speaker that I'm going to announce in a few minutes, joining us from across the country. The beauty of these virtual meetings is we've been able to get incredible world-class speakers from across the country and across the globe, and we're continuing that tradition today. But before we jump into that presentation, I want to tell you about next month so that you can mark your calendars. Next month, we'll be hosting Hemet Meta. We've been trying to book Hemet for a year and a half, and a few complications have happened. He was planned to be our March speaker and had plane tickets to visit us in Los Angeles, but has decided to join us this December virtually. So we're thrilled to have Hemet join us, and we hope you RSVP on Meetup, Facebook, Eventbrite, or check out our website for details on that event. I want to quickly mention we had a $2,500 matching gift that I mentioned at the last meeting. We have exceeded and hit this goal. So I want to congratulate all of you that supported this campaign. We get to celebrate our 38th birthday by accomplishing this huge goal. And we brought in a lot of new donors and supporters while doing this campaign. So again, I want to thank you all for participating. And with that, we hit the end of the year. And as the executive director of this organization, I have to tell you, we have a big goal set. I met with our fundraising and membership committee yesterday, and we decided we are so excited to get over with 2020 that our goal for 2021 is $20,210. So that we can truly celebrate 2021 and hit all of our ambitious goals for programming that year. I will be sending out more announcements after this meeting. We've accomplished incredible things in 2020, given all of the challenges we had in front of us, but I really do want you to check out our fundraising campaigns we'll be launching on Monday. And support us with an end-of-year gift. It's incredibly challenging running a local community during these times for supporting free thought, secular, and atheist activism in California and across this country that has completely mishandled this coronavirus. And so we need your support to be as large and as successful as possible next year. So please consider a donation to us. These meetings alone, which we no longer do in person, we used to raise $200 to $400 a meeting. We have lost that source of revenue. So we need your support to not just survive, but thrive coming out of this pandemic. Let's get to the fun part. Let's kick off our presentation for today. Before we go straight into Danielle, though, we have a quick Atheist Minute from our board president, Christine Jones. So Christine, I'll let you take the floor, and then we'll go to our presenter.
Hey, well, hi, everybody. It's not really, I guess this is not really an Atheist Minute about myself, but it's about our organization and how we are finding our outreach legs during the pandemic. We have started doing food outreach events every month. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we started in April. We had food giveaways for maybe about 50 people. It was not very well known. And every month it's increased. And this last month, which was just this past Friday, we had a turnout of about we had more people that we could give away food to. We had turkeys, and we had all kinds of the turkey Thanksgiving complete dinners in packages. So like I said, we were fighting our outreach legs during this pandemic, and food giveaway is one of them. And I really want to thank our board member, Tom Bresnahan, for starting this and making this one of our most successful in-person programs. We don't have a lot of in-person programs, first of all, because of the pandemic, but this is not just in person, but one of our better programs overall. So I want to thank Tom and also our many other board members and volunteers who attend this event, including Arlene Rios, Klaus, Evan, and many other volunteers, Barbara Ruiz. I can't think of all the names because we have so many wonderful volunteers. But thank you all for helping and making this community. It's a community event, and we are becoming a much stronger community because of this. And I am so pleased and proud to have everybody who participates, and our members. I'm very proud of all of our members for their participation in making our community strong.
Great, thank you. Wonderful. All right, I tried to remove the spotlight. Hopefully that worked. I'll just make myself the spotlight. All right, so let's introduce Danielle, our speaker for today. I've known Danielle for quite a few years, and I'm absolutely thrilled to host her. I have your short bio. I apologize if there was a longer bio.
No, it's right. Fine.
Danielle Muscato is a civil rights activist, writer, community organizer, public speaker, podcaster, musician, chef. I've been checking out your social media, some great chef posts recently. Trans woman, former public relations director for American Atheists. She's appeared in media outlets from CNN to NPR to the Rolling Stones to The Root to the New York Times. And her work is supported through Patreon, Twitter, social media, has a massive social media following, has done incredible work, especially since the pandemic hit, has been a part of resistance movements and social justice movements for years. And it is an honor to be hosting her. So Danielle, I give you the floor.
Evan, thank you so much for organizing this and inviting me to speak. We were chatting briefly before the event started. It's my understanding I'm the first trans person, at least since Evan has taken over as ED, and possibly ever for your group. I'm honored and thrilled. A little surprised considering it's 2020 and you're in Los Angeles. That's problematic to me. We'll talk about that later. But I'm thrilled. I'm honored, and as Evan said, we go back a long way. There's a pandemic. There's a lot of important topics that you could be talking about right now. There's a lot of people coming to terms with mortality and thinking a lot about the real things that they want to be doing with their time on this planet instead of staring at a computer screen all day. And I just want to say it means a lot to me that you're taking a couple of hours of your day on a weekend to stare at a computer screen to hear what I have to say. I appreciate that. I appreciate this audience, and as an activist, the income, but I really just appreciate that you care enough about what I'm here to talk about to want to be a part of it. Sometimes it's a struggle to get people to listen to this at all, and to have people voluntarily do this and pay me to do it. It's great. I'm thrilled that you want this information. I'm happy to give it to you. So thank you for that. If you don't know me already, as Evan said, my name is Danielle Muscato. My friends call me Ellie, which you're welcome to do too. I also want to introduce myself with my pronouns, which are she and her. I encourage everybody, anytime you introduce yourself, not just for talks like this, but anywhere that you would say your name, so your email signature and your Twitter bio, anything like that. When you're introducing yourself, you should say your pronouns too. You can't tell somebody's pronouns by looking at them, But yeah, I'd love for you to go ahead, grab your phone, and if you want to follow my work, my handle on everything is just Danielle Muscato, DanielleMuscato. I'm mostly active on Twitter. I do have a Facebook page and a Facebook profile. My profile is more memes and my personal life, and I post on there a lot more often. My page is more activism related things and efforts and projects that I'm working on. but my page is verified, so make sure you're getting that one, because there are imposter ones. And my Twitter is verified also for the same reason. I just want to say I love interacting with my audiences during the talk. I always want a Q&A, but not just then. I encourage you to reach out and to stay in touch if you have any questions about anything that I said or anything else. So you just want to talk to me. I like meeting people. I like connecting with people. That's why I do this. And just and not just the networking in the sense of connecting communities and so on, but in the sense of how we can help each other more. That's what I do, is mutual aid. And the more people that I'm in touch with, the bigger those networks are, and the more that we can all accomplish together. Please stay in touch with me. I'm looking to meet people and chat with you. Send me a friend request if you'd like on Facebook. And again, I'm on Twitter and Patreon and so on. If you want a book recommendation, I read a lot. I love giving book recommendations. Yeah, so if it's okay to put in a little plug, Evan mentions that I'm on Patreon, and activism is my full-time job, and Patreon is my primary source of income during COVID. It's pretty much my only source of income. My average supporter pledges $5 a month, and that's literally how I survive. The reason I'm able to do what I do is because of my Patreon supporters. I know some of you are watching this. I want to take a second especially to thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your financial support that makes my life and my work possible. And I'd love for anybody else watching who's interested in joining that. The lowest tier is $1, but any amount that you want to do helps, and there's perks and stuff that go along with that. But anything that you can do to reach out to support right now, if you have the privilege and the resources to be able to do that, doesn't have to be to me, but do something. and direct support is often the best way to do that. And if you're looking for more ways to get involved, you can also contact me too. One of the major issues facing trans people and oppressed people of all kinds is the wealth and the income gap. I know that many of your speakers have salaries from nonprofits and universities and so on. I'm a freelancer, and when COVID started, organizers were canceling literally everything because we didn't know how we were going to be able to transition this to online, or how long this was going to last, or what. We had more important things to worry about than summer conferences and so on. And for speakers like me with severe health issues that are already there, and some other privilege type issues and transphobia and so on, it's already dangerous for me to travel a lot of the time. I sometimes have to hire bodyguards and things like that because of the threats that I get. And I just want to say it's been a dark time, not knowing what's coming next. And I'm very glad that over the last year, we've kind of collectively as communities figured out how we're going to pull through this. And I want to talk about how we can accomplish that. I know this isn't the same as an in-person meeting, and that you miss a lot of the things about schmoozing with people and networking and so on. But I'm really glad that we're able to make this work and transition online. I'm thrilled with that, as everyone's talking about bringing in people from all over the place. As a public speaker, pre-COVID, at least, I'm usually or was on the road about 50% of my time. Although these days I'm focusing more, one second, on mutual aid work, as I mentioned, and I'm going to be talking about that quite a bit today. But Evan also mentioned my culinary background, and I have experience putting projects together from the ground up and starting organizations and things like that. So part of what I've been working on is efforts to get meals to unhoused people. Unhoused people are really, in my experience and opinion, the people being hardest hit by this, in the sense that they are unable to socially distance or isolate, at least. They can't wash their hands. I mean, they can't panhandle right now. All of the handyman type jobs that normally you can pick up extra income doing that kinds of thing. Everybody's out of work. Everybody's looking for secondary sources of income, and these people are just, it's really terrible. They're just disappearing. Nobody can go to their funerals. Nobody wants to get close to them, and and it's horrible. And so that's kind of where my effort is going here in Louisville. I'll talk a little bit about that later. So Evan mentioned that I'm the former public relations director for American Atheists. I think probably from this audience, that's likely how most of you know of me, if you know of me. I'm still an atheist, and it's not that that's not important to me anymore, but it's really not what I talk about anymore. I work just as much with churches nowadays as any other group that I work with. The group that I'm working with right now, the project that I'm doing for feeding unhoused people in Louisville is centered and located at a church. Since I came out as trans when I was 30 in 2014, my activism focus has shifted really from separation of religion and government to more trans civil rights and healthcare access, but really not just that, to racial justice and labor economics and feminism and a lot of other topics too. I mentioned that my Twitter handle is just my name. I'm also on Patreon, but I also host a podcast that Evan mentioned. It's called the Resist Podcast. I do want to say it's kind of on hiatus right now, just with gestures vaguely in terms of releasing new episodes. But the first season is free and it's on iTunes. Or I should say it's not free, it's funded by Patreon, but it's free to listen to. We talk about fighting against fascism and white supremacy and other social justice topics along those lines. The structure of the show is 1 hour long interviews in a studio. Sometimes it's one-on-one. Often I will have a guest co-host with me who can provide another perspective from mine and who has some intersectionalities between the guest and me. The show has a mix of higher profile people, executive directors of nonprofits internationally and Hollywood names and people like that. But most of the guests, probably 75% of them, are people who are on the ground activists that you've never heard of. And that's why I chose them, so that people are drawn in for the big names and then they get to hear all this on the ground stuff too. We haven't released all the new episodes yet, as I was saying, but just to give you an example of some of the types of things we talk about on the show and some of the people we've had on, Margaret Huang, the executive director of Amnesty International, the executive director of American Atheists, Nick Fish has been a guest, Greta Gustavo Martala from the Trans Lifeline, and some people who are active as activists in other ways besides heading up nonprofits. We had Jamila Jamil from NBC's The Good Place on, and the actress who exposed Harvey Weinstein, and the author of the book Brave, Rose McGowan, the actress, Broadway actress and activist Emmy Rossum from Showtime's show Shameless, the musician and feminist activist Fiona Apple has been on. So as I was saying, the Resist podcast is free on iTunes. You can also listen to it on Stitcher and a few other places. But like I said, new episodes are on hiatus right now. I also appear in the media as a talking head. I write articles and essays and books. Under normal circumstances, I travel around and speak a lot at medical schools about trans healthcare access and some of the issues that trans people face trying to seek healthcare. And at conferences, meetups, and direct action events like protests and so on. I also have a live stream where I do a social justice Ask Me Anything while I teach people how to cook traditional Northern Italian recipes from scratch that I learned from my grandmother, that I do 3 times a week. If anybody is interested in that, it's free online on Facebook, and you can tune in and learn how to cook and ask questions about social justice. And there's lots of pictures of my cooking on my Instagram too, if that interests you. I learned how to cook from my grandmother, who died at 105 from COVID this year. And she never learned to speak English, and little Italian Catholic woman. Yeah, it's really a shame the life that she has had and the things that she has seen, and this is how it ended up. But Yeah, I've known Evan since 2012. I was an intern and a staff writer for the Secular Student Alliance in Columbus, Ohio, working on their group running guide. This graphic designer, Ellen Lundgren, who lives in Austin, Texas now, and I wrote a book together for the SSA that they send out to all their new affiliate chapters. It's basically like an A to Z guide to starting and running a campus activism group. Everything from choosing a name and getting formal university recognition all the way up through getting grants and hosting multi-day conferences is what's in that book. If that's information that interests you, you can download that PDF also on the Secular Student Alliance website. Oh man, the world sure has changed a lot since 2012, hasn't it? My gosh, I was still in the closet then. Obama was president. Nobody had heard of COVID. It seems like a lifetime ago. I mean, shit, a year seems like a lifetime ago, you know? It's kind of too bad we're doing this online. My family lives in Los Angeles and it would have loved to come out and see them too. I haven't seen them since the beginning of 2019. Actually, I know that a couple of them are watching right now, so hello. Let me start out by telling you a little bit about why I do what I do and why I'm here talking to you and why you should be listening to this person as opposed to all the other people you could be listening to. A lot of, let me put it this way, a lot of queer people, a lot of people of color, we don't really spend a lot of our energy on atheism in itself, even if we're atheists. I previously believed, and I still understand this perspective, but I don't tout it anymore, that the trunk of the tree of the issues that are destroying humanity was religion. The Christopher Hitchens view that religion poisons everything, and the Sam Harris view that if you, or it might have been Dawkins, that if you could eliminate either religion or rape, which one would you choose? And it's religion. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that anymore. I still think a Christian theocracy is pretty close to my worst nightmare, don't get me wrong. But in the last 5 years or so, since I've come out of the closet as trans and since I've started working with all sorts of different groups as a speaker and as an organizer, I've changed my view on this. I no longer think religion is the root cause of humanity's problems like this. I think it's a tool, or maybe a better word for that is a weapon that, just like racism, people with power wield to oppress and divide us and distract us and manipulate us to stop us from organizing against them. And these types of tactics, religion and I should say religious propaganda and racist propaganda, these are weapons that work on selfish and ignorant people and people who are easy to manipulate using these tools. And I want to impress upon you that part of being a humanist means also to be anti-racist. We're going to talk more about that later, but it's part of the same thing also, that being a humanist means to be anti-capitalist, and we'll come back to that. I think it's obvious that Trump is not actually religious and could not care less about religion. Even setting aside, I don't know if everybody read Michael Cohen's book, Trump's lawyer and a fixer, mob lawyer type person for years and years before he was elected. He's in jail now, or I think he's out right now because of COVID, but he went to prison for all the things that he did, and he wrote a book trying to kind of tell everything and set the story straight, since he got caught and there's nothing left to hide now. But in that book, he talked about this incident where Trump met with a bunch of evangelical leaders as president-elect and talked about a bunch of policy things, and they prayed for him at this end of this meeting. And he let them and closed his eyes and did the whole, there's a picture of it in his book about this, of them praying for him. And then he went into the hallway and he was talking to his lawyer and he's like, can you believe they believe that bullshit? Like, I mean, this is what our government is made up of people who take advantage of racist people who want someone to blame, and capitalism makes it really easy to push that onto people of color and to atheists. I want to say that I understand that you probably want me to talk about trans issues. The second week of November is celebrated annually as Trans Awareness Week, culminating in the Trans Day of Remembrance for murdered trans people. The 21st annual Day of Remembrance was Friday. And that I'm aware of, that I could find 185 cities in 20 countries hosted vigils. It's probably a lot more than that. But it's, as far as like citywide formal events, that's what we're looking at there. 2020, not just because of COVID, but because of a lot of things having to do with our political climate, has been the deadliest year it's been the deadliest anti-trans violence year since we started keeping those kinds of records of that type of hate crime. It's hard really to even say that or know that, though, because there are a lot of problems that go into collecting that kind of data. When a trans person is murdered for being trans, it's often not reported that way by the police or by the news, or even by the family. If they weren't out of the closet, or sometimes even if they were out of the closet, many obituaries of trans people use their dead name and the wrong pronouns, and that's that's the last word. So no one reading this obituary of a trans person would even know that they are trans, or that the cause of their early death was hatred. This is especially true for trans people who die by suicide from harassment, especially if their family wasn't supportive. Obituaries are generally provided by family, even if that family was not supportive and disowned them and they were unhoused or whatever the situation was when they died. It's really terrible. I've seen, I mean, one is too many, but I've seen way too many graves of people that I know with the wrong name on them because their hateful families insisted on having the last word about that. But I'm not really sure actually that this is the most important priority for you to hear me talk about. Well, I've got the attention of this particular audience. Being trans in this country is shitty. I'm not gonna try to beat around the bush about that. We're treated very poorly by much of society and by our governments. We're discriminated against in employment and in housing, and in our personal lives, and in every other way that you can think of. We're much more likely to be murdered. We're much more likely to be unhoused. We're much more likely to live in all sorts of unsafe and unhealthy ways that we don't want to be living in those conditions. Nobody wants to live like that. We don't have access to healthcare that we need, or as many above board income opportunities as cisgender people. If you're not familiar with the word cisgender, CIS gender, cisgender is the opposite of transgender. It's just a way of saying that if you were like assigned male at birth and you still identify as a boy or as a man, and that's your identity, you are cisgender. If you were assigned male at birth and you no longer identify as a boy or as a man, you're transgender. And the same for non-binary or assigned female at birth. A lot of trans people are sex workers because those are some of the only income opportunities available to us. and it's not like, you know, we ever call the cops or anything anyway. That it's, you know, that's not a safe thing for us to do either. A lot of trans people get our healthcare under the table through support groups or secret networks of providers who are nurses or doctors, but see us out of their homes because that's the only way that we would have access to them. And it's, I just want you to understand, we have had to create our own economies and our own access to healthcare because our access to healthcare is limited. And I'm not just talking about transitioning care, although that's part of it and actually getting slightly better. But I'm talking about the income and wealth gap here. We don't have the same opportunities for health insurance that cisgender people do, and we don't have the same opportunities for stable housing that cisgender people do. It makes it very difficult for us to function in a capitalist society like this if we're excluded from it in that way. So we just, I mean, we just don't go. We just don't go for healthcare. We get harassed going just from people in the lobby, from checking in, from our own doctors sometimes, often even. There's a whole thing called trans broken arm syndrome, which is this idea that once your doctor finds out you're trans, then it all becomes about you being trans, even if you're there because you broke your arm. I've had lots of situations come up with my friends and myself and people that I've talked to about this, where they are afraid to disclose to their doctors, except their endocrinologist, that they're trans because they're not going to be treated well. They're going to be discriminated against. They're going to be harassed and misgendered, and I mean, humans are storytelling animals, right? Let me give you an example of this. I was being harassed, viciously, impersonated online, stalked. It was a pretty bad thing that was going on at the time, and I was talking to my therapist about this. Someone I'd been seeing for about 4 months through the free clinic, and it wasn't somebody that I picked. It was somebody who was assigned to me. But obviously, it was clear that I was trans and that this was part of treating me, was going to be dealing with this, even if that's not her area of expertise. But I had a particularly rough session in which my therapist didn't think that it would be advisable for me to drive myself home. And my housemate was available at the time to come and pick me up. So I suggested that we send that person a message for a ride. And my therapist did, and misgendered me multiple times in this written paragraph of sending a message asking for a ride. And I was like, well, shit, my own therapist uses the right name and pronouns to my face, but only to my face. And like, this is supposed to be somebody who's guiding me through transitioning and harassment for being trans. This is the level of care that trans people get when we seek therapy. And it's just not worth it. This is why we have support groups instead. And it's why I talk about the things that I talk about with medical school students, because they're not taught this in their classes. The only thing med school students learn in their classes is what they have to know for the board exams. There's no questions on the board exams about trans people, even though trans people make up approximately the same percentage of the population as people who are type 1 diabetic. We're not rare. Every single one of you has met a trans person, whether you know it or not, has shared a bathroom with a trans person, whether you know it or not. We're out there. And you're going to have to learn to deal with that. I'm sorry, but Biden's Trans Day of Remembrance press release, he said that the society of the societal attitude of being anti-trans is intolerable under his administration. This is no longer open for debate. The world consensus of scientists and anthropologists and sociologists and gender studies professors and medical doctors and endocrinologists and biologists and geneticists, the people who study these things, is that trans people are the gender that we say that we are. If you disagree with that, I'm sorry, it's not a matter of debate. You're just wrong. And you should be asking yourself where your opposition to this idea is actually coming from, because it's not the science. I'm going to spend some time today talking about being a trans woman and living in Kentucky as a trans woman. And I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A about anything you want, including those topics, including my personal life, if you have questions about that. But I also want you to understand that I don't generally introduce myself as a trans activist. I'm an activist who happens to be a trans woman. I've also been unhoused. I talk a lot about unhoused work and activism that I do related to that. I'm also an atheist. That's more in line with my professional background. I came out as trans in late 2014, but I mean, I was already employed as a professional activist at the time with you know, a $50,000 a year salary and going on CNN and talking about activism stuff. I just happened to be trans. And I don't have any formal credentials or training or expertise about trans healthcare. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I didn't even finish college. You know, I got hired at American Atheist my junior year, my dream job, so I took it. I went to college after 10 years of being a musician and then deciding I wanted to switch careers because of chronic back pain. I wasn't able to tour anymore. But I talk about trans issues because they intersect with a lot of other types of oppression that exists for poor people and for people of color, especially in highly religious areas of the country like Louisville, Kentucky, where I live. But fairly often I would say that I don't even really care that much about the fact that I'm trans. It's not something that is the core of how I see myself. Really, I'm mostly reminded of it when I'm harassed for it. So I had originally put together a bit of a different idea for what this talk was going to be about in terms of mutual aid and racism and anti-capitalism and totalitarianism and fascism and how we're fighting back and how you can help fight back against those things. I am going to be talking about that. But I want to take a second and talk about this. I was chatting with Evan also before we started the session, and this week I saw the Facebook event page that Evan put together beautifully for promoting this talk, and some of the comments there from a surprisingly large subset of your membership, who were upset that this group had brought me in to speak because I'm transgender, not because of my qualifications as a humanist or atheist activist, or because of the information that I was offering about mutual aid, but just because I happen to be trans. I've got a couple of the comments here that I'm just going to read to illustrate if you haven't seen them. I'm not going to name the names of the people, but if you're sensitive to anti-trans bigotry, content note for that. Quote, extremely disappointing that an atheist event would host a postmodernist adherent as if this isn't the exact opposite of rationalism. The speaker's entire existence is based upon a faith-based dogma, pseudoscience, misogyny, and homophobia with a healthy dose of narcissism. This is not atheism. Another one, if you believe that a man can be a woman on his say-so or because he has a gender identity, which seems pretty much like a soul when you say, I'm not sure how you can really claim to be free thinkers or rationalists. I knew the atheist community had a pretty deep-seated misogyny problem, but I thought maybe that could eventually be overcome by critical thinking. Apparently not, if this is how you're going to play it, giving a speaking opportunity that might have gone to an atheist woman to a gender faithful man who identifies as a woman. Here's another, is this a joke? Atheists by definition do not believe in any theology, but the notion that men can be women is exactly that, disproven belief. What kind of atheists repeat religious mantras and attack non-believers? Sounds pretty theist to me. So are atheists hiring female impersonators for the entertainment value, or have they joined the ranks of science deniers by pretending men can be women? I could go on, you get the point. But I'm realizing I've got to slow way down here. You all are not ready for a talk about anti-fascism and anti-capitalism. We need to cover some Trans 101 stuff first. I want to make it clear that I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this issue, and I said this before, we can talk about it during the Q&A. Nothing is off limits in my Q&A. But my personal identity as a trans woman doesn't define me. And it isn't the most interesting or important thing about me, I hope. It's not like the one identity out of my various identities, my marginalized ones or not, that I really consider to be the one that I identify with the most, or that I spend the most of my time or my energy on as an activist. For oppressed and marginalized people, existence is resistance in itself, and I agree with that. Sometimes I do have trans pride, but like I'm realizing I don't actually own a trans flag or anything like that. I have this. This is what I keep handy. It's actually usually back here, but it fell earlier. And I have another one that I just keep in my car with the bag that I use for protesting. That's really more where my energy goes, honestly. My gender is a part of me. It's one way that I am. It affects my life. But I'm so much more besides a trans woman or even just a woman. I feel like I have more urgent things to do with your time than talk to you about Trans 101 things. I want to help you understand that because of my existing visibility as an atheist activist and my job and so on, that when I came out, a lot of people wanted me to talk about trans issues, and I'm happy to talk about those. At first, I used to say I'm not a trans activist, I'm an atheist activist, and if you want to talk about trans issues, you should probably hire a speaker who has gone through medical transitioning and or a scientist or somebody who can talk to you about that. But over the last 5 years, I've realized that my experience is part of this too, and it's a part of it that doesn't get as much attention as I think that it should have for people, in terms of the experience that a lot of trans people have is often more like mine in some ways, in terms of not being able to transition the way that you want, and only being visibly trans because of your clothing, or because you wear, I don't actually have it on today, I usually wear a little pin that says she, her on it. Sometimes people who don't know me or my medical history think or suggest to me that I'm trying to make some kind of point by calling myself a woman or a trans woman, while daring to look the way that I do. I didn't ask to look the way that I do. I don't think that I should have to say that. I didn't ask to be transgender either. Being trans has caused me a whole lot of suffering, and it continues to cause me a whole lot of suffering. I get harassed for it every single day doing my job, giving this talk. I'm gonna be dealing with harassment from saying the things that I'm saying for the next couple of weeks. The first thing I do in the morning, every morning, is I get my phone and I start going through my social media and cleaning up all the shit from overnight, the anti-trans stuff on all of my platforms. It depends on day to day, how many that is. If nothing happened in the news and I didn't write anything online that day before, it's probably just half a dozen things. If some right-wing Twitter personality decided to target me for some reason, it could be literally thousands and thousands of horrible shit. And I don't have time for this. If I bother to report all of those comments, that would be literally all I got done. I have to read them all because some of them contain credible threats of violence that I have to act on. And I have a secret Facebook group with about 50 people in it who help me deal with this. The whole purpose of it is for allies to help me report this crap, since I don't have time to do it, and it is against the various social media platforms' terms of service. Sometimes I post examples of the harassing content that I receive, the types of things that I read to you just now, to show people the kinds of things that I go through doing my job, trying to help poor people. It's, I've had to move multiple times because I've been doxxed. I have been threatened. I have been stalked. I've had a gun pointed in my face and told it was loaded and that I better get right with God because I'm about to die. I have, since coming out of the closet, lost just about everything. I've been homeless. I've been disowned by my Catholic family. I've lost old friends. I would not wish this on anyone. And just to make sure we're on the same page about it, like, I am not getting rich doing this work, okay? I mean, I make less than $10,000 a year, and that's been true for about 5 years now. It's the suggestion that I'm subjecting myself to this for attention or money is frankly laughable, and really just demonstrates to me how far anti-trans people are willing to go with mental gymnastics to deny the medical and scientific and globally government consensus that trans people exist. It's just astonishing to me that that's where we are with this. I mean, it's been 70 years since the medical community accepted that trans people exist. The first trans surgeries and hormonal transitions were in the 1950s. This should be over, you know? But we're starting to see progress. When Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time magazine and it said the transgender tipping point back in 2013, Laverne Cox, of course, is the trans actress from the Netflix hit show Orange is the New Black. Actually, it's right over here somewhere. I'm not going to find it this second. Somewhere on my bookshelves, I have the book Orange is the New Black from Piper Kerman. I have a signed copy of it. We follow each other on Twitter, actually. But my point is, that was in my mind pretty similar to the 1996 Newsweek cover of Ellen DeGeneres, where she said, "Yep, I'm gay," as the cover. And that was the moment that it was no longer socially acceptable for at least people on the left to make being gay the butt of jokes on you know, in comedy it's a little bit different, but like especially if you're doing it to yourself, you know, the way that the show Ellen did. But that was one of the highest grossing, most popular comedies of the time, same as Orange is the New Black in, you know, the early 2010s. And we're making progress. It just takes time. And it takes the effort of activists, but mostly it takes the effort of allies. Anti-trans people are not going to listen to me. They don't care what I have to say. And I'm not saying what I'm saying for them because they don't care. They really, really don't. The people who they will listen to is people that they trust and admire, who disagree with them and want to help them understand. I'm talking about cisgender allies, not trans people. This is the exact same reason that I talk so much about racism, because racists are not going to listen to Black people about racism. They have already decided that their opinions don't matter. And they are looking for ways to justify this besides listening to Black people or other people of color. So my job is really talking to people on the left and radicalizing them and lighting a fire under their ass to help us with this work. I want to talk a little bit about coming out as trans and how that happened, and tell this story briefly. This was in 2014. I mentioned I was still working at American Atheist, and realizing that turning 30, it was time for me to come to terms with this and start seeing a doctor about it if I wasn't going to just decide not to do that. And I knew that this is something that I had to do. And I visited a doctor. The first doctor I went to, a psychiatrist, the way this was structured in New Jersey at the time, you had to have a formal diagnosis from a psychiatrist first for gender dysphoria. Then you had to see a therapist for 6 months. The therapist had to sign off on a form that said, in their professional opinion, that they've talked to you about this. You understand that transitioning causes permanent changes. You understand what transitioning is. You think that you really are transgender. Your medical providers agree with this assessment of your health, and then they will refer you to an endocrinologist for hormonal therapy if that's part of your transition plan. So the first psychiatrist that I went to, when I told him I'm trans and I would like to take steps to start transitioning and see what's next, he told me that, well, there really isn't anything to do about it. He said, if you want to talk to a therapist, I can refer you to a therapist, but there's not like medication for this if you want to get rid of that. And I was like, I'm pretty sure there's medication for this. I'm pretty sure that this is something that has a medical protocol for it. I'm very glad that I was not a 14-year-old going to this guy and that I knew what I was talking about and I was able to seek a different doctor. But you know, that was in 2014 in New Jersey, with good healthcare. The second doctor that I went to formally diagnosed me with gender dysphoria and referred me to a therapist. I had 6 months of therapy. My first therapist said that she was not exactly comfortable guiding someone through transition because, to her knowledge, she didn't have any other trans patients. And she said that she didn't really feel like she knew enough about this to be the right person for that. But she agreed to talk to me about it. And she joked often that she should be paying me for these sessions because they were basically me teaching her, not the other way around of her guiding me. At the end of that period, the next step was actually a referral to a cardiologist. I have very serious life-threatening pre-existing heart conditions. I take 14 medications a day and I am not currently hormonally transitioning, just to be clear. This is for other health problems. And it's according to the professional medical opinion of multiple cardiologists. I'm not talking about psychiatrists. I'm not talking about endocrinologists. I'm not talking about the people who usually are involved with transitioning, but cardiologists, heart doctors, that it would be medically ill-advised, is one way to put it. I was told directly that I will not survive a hormonal transition. So if I think that I can survive not transitioning, then I should probably opt for that. And that was a pretty devastating thing to hear because I wanted to transition. I have done some other things to transition. You can't have surgery unless you've already done hormones. Surgeons won't even talk to you because hormones change a lot of things about the way that your subcutaneous fat is distributed. And there's a lot of things that go into it, and they don't want to do surgeries until after hormones have done everything they're going to do. So that's not an option for me, even if financially it were, which is a separate issue, but also just as important. But I have done other things to transition. I grew out my hair. Not that that's necessarily, what it takes to be a woman. I dress femme when it's appropriate. When I'm speaking, I'm kind of more of a tomboy the rest of the time. I grew out my nails. I legally changed my name. I legally changed my gender. If you, at this point, misgender me or dead name me, you should be aware that that's not legally who I am. You're doing that on purpose, not, to be anti-trans. It's not actually my name. And it's, I'm sorry, I'm having some anxiety. Okay. I didn't come out voluntarily, and I didn't choose the timing of when I came out. Among the handful of people that I trusted with the fact that I'm trans before I was ready to come out, one of them decided to leak that information to the Christian Post newspaper. And this was apparently newsworthy because of my job role at the time. And I agreed to an exclusive interview with them when they called me about it and asked me if it was true that I was trans one day at work, I agreed to do an exclusive with them if they would allow me to scoop them and come out myself the next day on my own terms. And at the beginning of this talk, Evan mentioned Hemant Mehta, who's going to be speaking next time. I came out on Hemat's blog. Hemant and I are friends. I wasn't ready. I was, and I still am not able to transition medically, but I had to come out. It wasn't my choice. This is not the way that I want to look. It's just the way that I look. And I'm sure that's true for plenty of women out there, regardless of what's between your legs or what's in your DNA. If I weren't balding and if I didn't have so much facial hair and if my body was shaped differently, I'd be very happy about that. Again, all things that plenty of cisgender women have said verbatim. I want to say I didn't pop out of the womb knowing these things about trans issues. I learned because I had to, and that was long before anyone ever asked me to give talks on the subject. Anyone who wants to learn about trans people can. The information is out there. It's easy to find. It's free. I talk about it all the time. I have podcasts. I have essays. And there's plenty of places that you can find this stuff. I can recommend some reading if you want. Actually, I am going to plug a book. I should have grabbed it. There's a book by my friend Bryn Tannehill called "Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Trans But Were Afraid to Ask," that I highly recommend. It's entry level. There are a couple of things in there that I disagree with, but overall I think it's pretty good. Bryn Tannehill's book, "Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Trans But Were Afraid to Ask." GLAAD's website, GLAAD, also has a great section on tips for trans allies, and also tips for covering trans issues if you're a media outlet. And also, of course, you can ask me. That's why I'm here. This is my job. This is why you brought me in. There's a Q&A afterward, and you can always just reach out anytime besides that too. I want to impress upon you, though, a major difference in trans activism versus atheism activism. In this regard, it's appropriate and common for atheists to want to talk about atheism with religious people. We're known for enjoying debates. I've done countless formal debates as an atheist myself, and the subject suits itself well to that type of discussion. It's really only people with a lot of privilege who, in my experience, try to say that talking about religion is impolite. Atheists seem to understand that we have to talk about it because it's causing a lot of damage by doing this simultaneous flying under the radar in plain sight just by being so normalized. But trans activism is different. It's important to understand that there is a major distinction between how to talk to a trans activist about trans issues and how to talk to a trans person about trans issues. It is absolutely not okay to bring up the fact that a trans person is trans for no reason. A lot of trans people have severe trauma and PTSD related to harassment and do not want to be in the position of having to explain themselves or justify our existence to people like that. It's a personal subject, and unless you're dating us or you're our personal doctor or something, it's genuinely none of your business. Now, if you want to be a better ally, I'm very proud to hear that and grateful. I would encourage you to think of it more as being of an accomplice, though, rather than an ally. I want to take a second and explain the difference here. Allies shake hands with us and help us raise money and use their privilege that way. That's great. Accomplices fight with us. They take damage so we don't have to, because we can't withstand more damage. And that's really what privilege lets you do. When I organize protests and rallies and things like that, that's why the white people are there. That's what our job is to protect the people of color from the cops, because cops are not going to attack us the same way that they're going to attack people of color. And if you want to be an accomplice to trans people, take some of the force of this off of us. And that means that the vitriol and the misinformation that needs to be combated, it would help us for that to come from, for that to go to you and come from you rather than us. We have a lot of other things that we have to deal with, like surviving. And harassment is just more than we can bear much of the time. I do want to say that I am a trans activist. That's part of what I'm here for and part of what I talk about. And I am happy to answer your questions and have these discussions. It's not just my job, but I want people to have this information. That's why I do this. I'm thrilled that you want it. And I encourage you to ask me this stuff instead of just random trans people that you know or that you come across. But I also want you to understand that I myself have diagnosed PTSD and that it's not exactly easy for me to talk about this stuff either. It's just necessary. I don't enjoy getting harassed, just trying to do my job. No one should have to deal with harassment ever. But I want you to understand that I maybe not voluntarily, but at least knowingly subject myself to this so that other trans people out there trying to live their lives don't have to deal with this. I have a large network of supporters and people who I can talk to, and I have the resources and the ability to withstand a lot more hatred than most trans people. And by that I mean, I'm glad that anti-trans people who have an inclination to leave terrible comments or do these types of things, stalk and harass people, I'm glad that they're doing this to me and not some high school trans person who can't handle that. And that's why I do this, is I want young trans people to not have to deal with what I'm dealing with someday. But what I'm saying, ask me your questions, not them. Being a trans person is not an invitation to talk about a private subject like someone's gender the way that atheism can be. Now, I mean, if you're talking to a close friend and they tell you that it's okay to ask questions, that's very different. But I also want you to understand that everything that I know about trans issues, you can learn without being trans, just like I did, and I'm happy to help you if I can do that. It is true that being trans makes life harder. There's that saying that, you know, with the pandemic and everything, we all have to come together. We're all in the same boat. That's really not true at all. We are not in the same boat. We are in the same storm. Some of us have yachts and are doing pretty well, or even better than before. Some of us have rickety little rowboats with a few boards missing and will not survive the storm. The people that I'm seeing most affected by COVID, as far as doing my job of mutual aid, are trans people, but they're not just trans people. Trans people have been hit very hard by this as a group because of pre-existing issues like wage and income gaps, or wealth gaps, I mean, because we don't have as good access to healthcare as it is. And I mentioned that a lot of us have other conditions that put us at higher risk. But the people that I'm seeing most affected by COVID in my work are unhoused people, sex workers, trans people, people of color, people in prisons. These are often the same people who fit several or all of these labels. That's really what this is about. Racism is part of it. Wealth inequality is part of it. Being trans just makes it worse. It's just another piled on thing. I want to talk to you about homelessness and COVID and mutual aid, because I feel like these are things that this audience can really do something about and help with. And if you're asking me how you can be a better ally or accomplice and what you can do, this is actually where I want to put your attention. Mia Mingus, a friend of mine who's an activist from New York City, said something fantastic that I want to repeat to you. Focus on what you can do, even if it feels small. And another quote from a friend of mine here in Louisville who started Feed Louisville, the organization, with me. And no one helps us but us. When you're talking about mutual aid work, don't reinvent the wheel. Get plugged into existing networks and ask how you can help. Find people in your community who are already doing the work that you're interested in doing and learn from them while you help them do that work. Write down your skill sets and your hobbies interests, like cooking, or if you speak other languages, or if you can sew, or if you can sharpen kitchen knives, or whatever your skills are. Your availability, your contact information on multiple apps and platforms, what list resources that you can provide if you have a car, if you have power tools, if you have a Costco membership, those types of things. Any significant network connections you have to people with large social media platforms, or people with money, or both of those things. Think of it like a CV or a resume for frontline activism. Have this document put together and search on Facebook and other places for mutual aid groups and send this to them and ask how you can use your privilege to help. Capitalism relies on the breaking of relationships. We have to continue to build healthy relationships with each other because we cannot rely on the state. And that's more and more true the more marginalized identities that you have. I want you to remember that anytime you're talking about mutual aid or COVID or any of these things, always tag your posts with COVID-19 or related things so that other people can find them and work together. I want to approach this idea, this new world that we're building here with Biden as president-elect. This is an opportunity for us to shift structures and put things together in a way that actually makes sense and actually is good for people, rather than going back to the way things were. Frame your thinking by personally identifying as an activist. If you approach things with that view of yourself, that you're an activist and you call yourself an activist, you will notice things around you that you can affect, and you should do that. Always speak up when you see something wrong. When you see something problematic, call people in first and then call them out if that doesn't work. But the question that I want you to be asking yourself every day, literally, like when you get up, how can I use my privilege to challenge the barriers for the people in my community who struggle to meet their needs today? There's this saying that no one is free while others are oppressed. And that means that if you have privilege, that is your obligation to use it to help other people survive in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs sense. I want to talk about the facts. Well, I want to talk a little bit about what mutual aid is, I should say. Mutual aid is not bartering. It's not a substitute for a currency. It doesn't actually need to be mutual or transactional or like an even exchange like that. It's about examining your own blind spots and asking what marginalized people need from you and need you to understand, and using your privilege to do what you can, even if it feels small. Do as much as you can with the time and the resources available to you, but don't beat yourself up for not doing more than that. There's a pandemic. Everyone's base level of stress is very high. Everyone's ability to withstand bullshit is low. People get irritated faster when their cortisol levels are higher. People have fewer spoons in terms of chronic pain. Give yourself a break, but understand that there's a lot of people who do not have that privilege of taking one. And if you have resources, please step up. This is a multi-generational endeavor. We are not going to live long enough to see things be the way that we want them to be. but that's not the point. I think of it like a grandfather clock on a boat. And of course, you can't use grandfather clocks on boats. That's why John Harrison invented the Chelsea ship's clock, right? Pendulums don't work on boats. But picture this, that yes, I mean, with election cycles, things swing left and right, and that's just going to be the truth of it under the systems that we have. But the whole ship is moving to the left. It takes time, but it's moving, and this work is what moves it. That's the rowing that's moving the whole thing. It takes patience and persistence and vision and strategy and passion and resourcefulness. But the most important thing is compassion. Share your stories. I said this before, humans are storytelling animals. That's how we form narratives and remember things. It inspires other people to do the work and to stick with it when it's hard. This is how we build communities, even during a crisis. So I want to tell you a little bit about this. I mentioned earlier briefly this organization I've been working with. Since April, we started a group here in Louisville called Feed Louisville. We recently got our 501c3 status, which was very exciting. And we hired our first paid employee. So Feed Louisville is a network of restaurants. It started with 1, and now it's 14. So what we do is we raise money and we pay restaurants to use whatever leftover type things they have in terms of ingredients, come up with some inexpensive but nutritious and wholesome and tasty meal that they can make 50 of, or that they can make 200 of these portions, box them up in to-go containers, and then we pay them $2 per one of those to just come to their restaurant and pick them up in the afternoon when it's slow. And then in the evenings, we go around in our personal vehicles and distribute these to unhoused people around the city. So we've been doing this since April, 500 to 1,000 of these a day, this entire time, 7 days a week. We run out every single day. We are often told that this is the only thing that somebody's had to eat that day, unless they were able to shoplift something or whatever. And I personally, I'm not proud of this, but I personally had to step back a little bit from that role of delivering things, not just because of being high risk for COVID, but because I can't watch these people I used to be like that and have to steal food. And I'm sorry, this is really hard. A lot of people that I know are going to die very soon. And like, they won't even have funerals. It's just heartbreaking. I'm sorry. But the point is, we're doing the best that we can. It's not enough, but it's a start. And like I said, we recently got 501c3 status. We've got some people donating and making this work, and it's really fantastic. It's a model that I'm bringing around to other cities to talk to organizers in other places about replicating it. We want to grow it. We want to pay more than $2 per meal so that we can have restaurants be able to actually pay their staff a little bit more than just nothing. Basically, they're volunteering for this. That the $2 barely covers the cost of the to-go container and the ingredients themselves. But we also want to step it up in terms of the number that we're able to distribute, because every month there's more and more unhoused people, and this is just going to get worse, and it's going to continue to get worse before it gets better. I live in Kentucky, as I mentioned. This is Mitch McConnell's home state. You know, he's been a career politician for 40 years. It blows my mind. He's got a salary of, you know, what is it, 188,000 or something a year. and a legal requirement to maintain residence in DC and in its home district here, and somehow has a net worth of $30 million now. Here in Louisville, we've been protesting for the arrest of the cops who killed Breonna Taylor every day now for 5 months. We have a curfew. The National Guard is here. We had an active shooter in our protest camp. The cops just stood there. They didn't give a fuck if an active shooter is shooting up protesters. They're doing their job for them. This is what we're facing down here. It's not good. I want you to understand that going back to normal with Biden absolutely cannot be our goal. To paraphrase climate activist Greta Thunberg, I don't want you to have hope just because Obama's VP is now the president-elect. I want you to panic. The way things are, the way things were before COVID, even before Trump, is fundamentally racist, fundamentally destructive. We have to change it. I was in Ferguson for several years. I used to live there. Ferguson happened under Obama. That whole thing happened under Obama. Standing Rock happened under Obama. Private prisons happened under Obama. Trump paying nothing in taxes all those years, that happened under Obama. 6 Ferguson activists mysteriously died, one after the other. No one was ever charged. They were found and their cars burned to death. This is nothing new. They did the same thing to Fred Hampton from the Black Panthers and Reverend George Lee and Lamar Smith and Medgar Evans and Bruce Clunder and James Reeve and Vernon Dahmer and Warla Jackson and Dr. King. The United States has seen 300,000 excess deaths this year, just between January and October, according to the CDC, compared to what we should expect from the numbers from previous years. 2/3 of those are directly from COVID, but the rest are from poverty and racist public policy. People who were turned away from or scared away from emergency rooms, people who lost their jobs, and along with that, their normal healthcare coverage. The takeaway here is not just that more people have died from COVID than we're officially counting as have died from COVID. We know that already. But the point is, white people died at a 12% higher rate this year than average. But Black and Asian and Indigenous people died at a 33% higher rate this year than average. And Latinx people died at a 53% higher rate this year than average. This is structural racism. Did everybody watch the last presidential debate? Did everybody see that? Something that struck me was when Joe Biden said, I'm going to try to get his intonation right. There is structural racism in America. Well, no fucking shit, Joe. It blows my mind that this is like considered a brave and forward thinking for a Democratic nominee in 2020 to be talking about after George Floyd. Are you fucking kidding me? This has been abundantly obvious that structural racism exists in America to everyone who isn't white. Even before racists brought the first enslaved Africans here in 1619. Structural racism is the foundation of capitalism. Capitalism cannot exist without it. It is not possible to be anti-racist without being anti-capitalist. It is not possible to be a humanist without being anti-racist. Capitalism necessarily depends on exploiting people for profit, and it goes for the lowest bidder, and the easiest people to exploit are the people with the fewest access to human rights and protecting themselves, and that's people of color. That's always been true, and it's true around the world. Capitalism does a really great job of this. Back to COVID. We were talking about structural racism and how COVID disproportionately affects people of color. New Jersey and Oregon don't have self-service gas stations. Toll booths are still staffed by humans. Just make it free. Toll booths, are you kidding me? We don't need to have that kind of human to human interaction right now during a pandemic. Just make it free. We don't need to make money on these things. This is just, or better yet, pay people to stay home instead of giving even bigger tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. 8 million Americans face eviction right now. We had our first snow in Louisville today. We're in a pandemic. It's hard to isolate or even wash your hands if you don't have housing. And meanwhile, American billionaires have increased their wealth by $1 trillion in the past 7 months. Put another way, American billionaires have increased their wealth by 1/3 since the start of COVID. Is your net worth 1/3 higher than when COVID started? This is ridiculous. The total wealth of these people, there's 644 of these people. These are real humans, by the way. These are not mystery, mythical people. They actually exist somewhere on this planet right now. They have names and addresses. They are doing this to us. The wealth of these people, like $4 trillion, is double the wealth held collectively by the poorest 165 million Americans, or half of the population. Let me say that again. 644 Americans have $3.8 trillion of wealth right now, which is double the wealth held collectively by the bottom half of the country. 25 million Americans are unemployed. 22 million can't afford enough food. Mark Zuckerberg, where we're promoting this meeting on Facebook, he is 85% richer in the last 7 months. Elon Musk is 275% richer. Jeff Bezos is 80% richer. This is not sustainable. Before the pandemic started, we had worse wealth inequality in this country than in France the year before the French Revolution. And that was before COVID started, okay? That's where we are. This isn't sustainable. They're bringing patients to hospitals in Louisville from Georgia and from Florida because they're out of hospital beds there. We're just getting into flu season here. You can catch COVID and the flu at the same time. This is about to get a whole lot worse, and we are not ready. Flint still doesn't have drinkable water. It's been 6 years and counting. By the way, that crisis also started under Obama, 2 years before the end of his term. The point I'm making is that to be a humanist means not just that we don't believe God's will or can solve human problems. I think that's obvious. Being a humanist means we must be anti-racist. I want to make this point clear. I'm not talking about not being racist. To quote Angela Davis, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. And like I said before, to be anti-racist necessarily means to be anti-capitalist. I want you to talk to me or work with me on something. I know that we're getting out of time here, but close your eyes for a second. I'm serious. Actually do this. I want you to picture a place where you feel safe. Think about what is there and who is there, if there's anyone else there. What kinds of things you would have around you for a place that makes you feel safe. Okay. Did anybody picture a cop? I've asked this question in a lot of my talks. I've never had someone say yes to that who wasn't related to one. Cops don't make us safer. They don't. If you have more questions about that, I'd love to talk to you about it. I'm sure there are Star Trek fans among us. Captain Picard had a pretty famous line from that show that Sir Patrick Stewart, I think, really nailed. He said, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not weakness, that is life." I want to say something about that. I feel like that's a lesson that only white men need to be told as a life lesson, that only white men need to be told this as adults. It's a capitalist lie that if you do what you're supposed to do and you work hard, that you'll be healthy and wealthy and wise. Most people are never given that chance. I want to move on. I want to talk a little bit about, there's so many things.
Danielle, can we check in? We just hit an hour and a half, so I just want to.
I just realized that. I think what I'm going to do to structure the rest of this, I'd like to transition to the Q&A. And I have a whole bunch of resources here about mutual aid, about how to get involved, a guide to starting mutual aid groups, organizing neighborhood pods, a mutual aid toolkit for childcare, advice on minimizing exposure to the virus while doing mutual aid, best practices for setting up bail funds, all sorts of stuff. I think what I'd like to do is just give you all of these links to post later instead of talking about them. And then if people would like to ask me questions, I'd like to be available to do that. Somebody said links will work. Great. I'll pass those along to you, Evan. But Perfect. Yeah, I want to say before we wrap up this part that I'm really grateful for your time and for your attention, and that I hope that you get involved with mutual aid, and that this has been informative for you, and that if you have further questions, I would really like to talk to you, or if you have feedback for me, I'd really like to talk to you. In terms of the Q&A, like I said, nothing is off limits. Whatever you'd like to know, I won't be offended. I'm happy to talk about whatever you want. So I'll pass it back over to Evan.
Great. There's a few comments that have come through, questions and comments that I'll make sure get into the conversation, but to kind of bring the whole thing together, I'd love if you could just speak a little bit to, I think, a topic that keeps coming up in communities like ours and that I think people are kind of hinting at in the questions, which is how we connect atheist and humanist communities to resistance movements or not, and what the larger idea and language is we're using to make that connection. Because there are quite a few communities and activists that are doing that, and yet a lot of atheist communities have traditionally taken a very, very wide umbrella approach to where they feel like they can't go too intensely into some of these because it is they see the political spectrum and it looks like they're then kicking out people from the tent they have. And so how do you address that conversation, and where do you think the maybe ethical imperative of our community should be based on atheism, humanism, or where like our future is?
That's a great question. I work together a lot with religious groups, and I work together a lot with groups that are run by people of color. I think that one of the best ways to do that is to have a variety of different communities and events that you work with and let people decide for themselves which events they want to participate in. I think also, though, that there is an ethical obligation to be on the side of science and medicine and evidence and just being a compassionate humanist, to be to be an ally to queer people. I mean, that's just simply part of it. Suggestions that anything that I would say people on the right are supportive of when we're talking about social issues are not things that I want to be involved with. I think it's important to understand the way that big tents work like this. If you have an event and you say that you are welcome and open to both wolves and sheep, you're only going to get wolves because sheep are not going to come to that. So if you're looking around and you're not seeing who you want to see, and you're asking yourself why that is, the best question I think next to ask yourself is, who is here that maybe shouldn't be here, or who is here that is scaring away the people that I want to come, and why is that? And if it's because those people have beliefs that are fundamentally detrimental and harmful, whether they act on them or not, to the people that you're trying to bring into your fold, ask yourself if that's the way that you want to be structured and the groups that you want to have. I work with a lot of churches, as I mentioned this before. Feed Louisville is actually run out of a church. Our staging area and one of the kitchens that we use, the main one, and also that we use their accountant and we do all of our paperwork through them, is a church. And obviously I don't agree with them about some major things, but you know, they're doing the work and we're working together on the same goal of feeding unhoused people. There's no religious aspect of getting this done. Their motivations are different than mine maybe, but the work is exactly the same. And we do talk about atheism and religion and the way that that intersects with being queer and being unhoused and all those things too. But if your goal is to do the work, then you'll find ways to do the work. And I would say work together with groups locally and support the work that they're already doing, rather than trying to come in and like be part of the leadership team of that necessarily. It's tempting for people with expertise and resources to want positions of power when they're getting involved in helping an organization. It's a very different thing to offer the resources that you have to somebody who's doing the work that you support versus wanting to guide the work that they're trying to do. And they probably know more about what they need than somebody coming in from the outside, especially if you don't have the same life experiences that they do that cause them to be interested in going into this work in the first place. I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, and I have another follow-up, but I want to quickly thank you for earlier bringing up my pronouns are he, him, which I didn't get out at the beginning. The question I have is around, oh, don't tell me I just lost it. Intersectionality. You brought up that term a few times, and I think some people hear it but haven't heard it defined before. And I'd love for you to connect it a little bit between humanism, another term you've been using, and some of these other issues and causes. Because I think what gets lost sometimes in these conversations when a lot of humanists and atheists talk about how they have supported or centered different issues, maybe ahead of their atheist identity or the way their atheist community used to organize, the word intersectional is used. And I'd love for us to discuss that quickly.
Sure, absolutely. Intersectionality is an incredibly important concept in social justice work. It was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw some decades ago now. But basically the idea is that a marginalized person can and often does have multiple marginalized identities. She was talking about being Black and a woman, but and sometimes you have to choose kind of which version of approaching a problem that you want to address. And people tend to choose the one that is most urgent and the highest priority to them. This is kind of why you tend to see a lot of Black people not really so much interested in atheism activism, even if they're atheists. It depends on the situation and the individual, but you have to understand historically the role that churches have played in Black communities. When segregation was legal, you couldn't get a loan for a house or anything if you were Black. If you needed medical care, you couldn't just go to a doctor like that. You had to find a Black doctor. And the way that this was structured, churches were not just a place for people to practice their religion, but it was their entire support community and their network. It was very much, and still is, intertwined with how people live their whole lives in terms of not just weddings and funerals and events like that are milestones for people, but also this is where you go when you need bail. This is where you go when you need food. A lot of churches run soup kitchen type places. And even if you become an atheist, it can be very difficult to leave that community because there's this expectation that, you know, it's a mutual aid type of approach where you give and you take and nobody's keeping track transactionally, but to leave says, don't you appreciate everything that we've done for you this whole time and for your parents and for your grandparents, and how could you not want to give back? And there are reasons that people of color go to church that have nothing to do with religion. I mean, obviously, you know, this group was formed for similar ideas, but in terms of intersectionality, people are going to focus on what's causing them the most immediate harm. And often being an atheist is not what causes people the most immediate harm. If they're a person of color, if they're a woman, if they're trans, if they're unhoused, all sorts of things like that. In fact, being an atheist might not be getting you much closer to getting off the street if you're unhoused, considering the resources available to people who are willing to sit through a service first if they want dinner. And that's something that atheist groups need to be better about in stepping up. And obviously there are lots of, you know, Foundation Beyond Belief and groups that do all sorts of volunteer work out in the community and stuff. Especially during COVID, this has been a huge shift in the way groups won, and I'm thrilled to see that, and I want to see that continue. Yeah, people can have many intersections, and people tend to focus their effort and attention and energy on the ones that are doing the most damage, which isn't always atheism.
Let's do one or two more questions and then wrap, or we can let people have the chance to go eat if it's they haven't eaten in a while. But there's a lot of questions about capitalism.
I'm happy to talk about that.
As expected. So there was a few different frames. One was asking about what is the opposite of capitalism, and so is socialism what you're arguing, and what is socialism? Some are asking about, you made a comment about wolves and sheeps, and I think can be related back to capitalism, and they were talking about, well, can't the sheeps also be wolves in different contexts? There was another question about, can't you still be an atheist and a capitalist? And so I wanted you to engage this.
Sure. Yeah, let's go through some of them then. You can be an atheist and a capitalist. I think a lot of, when I'm talking about capitalists, by the way, I'm not talking about working people. Capitalists are absentee investors who live off the leached profits that they parasitically from workers. I'm talking about billionaires. I'm not talking about managers and people like that. People who have been told that they're capitalists because they live in a capitalistic system, but those people are, you know, the type of people listening to this talk. None of you are capitalists. You are workers in a capitalist system, and you're being exploited, just not as badly as some other people because of privilege reasons. But I think a lot of capitalists are atheists, and I think a lot of them are very focused on things having to do with extending their life and legacy because of that, because they know that this is it. You talked a little bit about different types of identities being sheeps or wolves in different contexts. That's definitely true. I mean, some of the feminists, self-identified feminist activists who made those comments on the wall, I'm sure that they're doing good work in other ways. But if you're harming people, then you're not doing good work. And I'm not saying that you can't occasionally do something good, but we should all be always striving to do the best that we can do and be the most compassionate that we can be. I want to say I understand this perspective that these people have. It's fear about it. They're not actually against the science of this, because the scientific consensus is obviously at this point very, very clear. They're scared. They're scared of losing the privilege that they have as women, and they're scared of opening the door to what that could mean. But I want to say we are on the same side. We are. I want to work on the same goals that you want to work for. And if you just see me as a person who's on your side and have compassion and empathy, we can accomplish a lot of our goals. I'm not here to get anybody. I'm not here to take work away from anybody. I'm here because I'm doing the best that I can do, same as you. And I think if we just connect with each other that way, and we just see each other as fellow people instead of being on opposite sides of things, and this in-group out-group thing, that it's healthier for everybody and lets us focus on bigger goals, such as taking on the capitalistic structures and the structural racism that exists in this country that are causing everybody so much trouble. You had mentioned a third point that I don't remember right now.
I think you actually covered it. I think it's
Okay.
okay. Yeah. And then the final question to wrap things up, somebody asked, are there places in America where it's becoming less safe and harder to be trans, and how do I avoid those places? Was a comment.
Yeah, so I travel all over the country. In the last 3 weeks, I've been to Louisville, Memphis, Houston, Austin, Boerne, Tulsa, Toledo. Oh gosh, I don't even know anymore. St. Louis. I've lived in a bunch of different places, both coasts, in the South, in the Midwest. Anti-trans attitudes, racist attitudes are very common everywhere. It comes out in different ways depending on where you are. There's this kind of Southern hospitality thing where to your face, they'll be polite, but they'll also discriminate, and then they'll come, later and beat the shit out of you with a baseball bat with 6 of their friends. Like, that's kind of how it plays out. Versus in New York, you're more likely to get like accosted on the street by somebody screaming at you for wearing a dress, and that's more the type of things that you have to deal with. I mean, really, during the pandemic, a lot of the harassment and the stuff that I'm dealing with is online, because so much of the work I'm doing is online. I'm sorry, could you repeat what you were, like the point of the question there?
It was asking about, are there places it's getting worse, and
right. Yeah.
Where those
yeah,
are.
I mean, I think it's definitely gotten worse under Trump. I don't know that it's honestly going to just magically get better under Biden. I think it's going to get slightly better. But I mean, like I said before, when Biden was vice president, I was a homeless trans woman. Like, I don't necessarily want to go back to that, you know? I hope that he's learned some lessons since then. But like, one of my major criticisms of Kamala Harris during the primary was not just that she's a cop, but the types of things that cops do. As a prosecutor, she was famous for putting trans women in men's prisons and denying them transitioning healthcare. That, I mean, if you're in prison, your healthcare comes from the prison. Like, you don't have any other choice. And forcing trans people to go off hormones because they were arrested for bullshit reasons and didn't have the resources to get out, even if they were innocent. And, you know, obviously this hits people of color harder. And yeah, I don't want a Biden Harris presidency. Like, I want it more than I want a Trump, Pence one. But I just want to make clear that I'm not really holding my breath for things to like get better. At the level that I'm working at, like, it doesn't honestly matter that much who's in the White House. That we're not getting the resources we need, regardless. That's been true for years. When COVID is over, or delayed, or whatever we're doing with this waves of it, we're still going to be running Feed Louisville. That need is not going to go away just because we have Democrats in office. And in terms of getting away from this, I don't think that's really how it works. I think the way that it works is actually more on the lines of speaking up about it and understanding that the more people who do that, the less socially acceptable it is for other people to treat trans people badly. And when we all work together to do that, to shame that behavior and help people understand that it's not just not helpful, but it's hurtful, then over time and collectively this will get better. But it's not geographically centered that way. I think that's kind of a myth. There are anti-trans people in all 50 states. There are like legal protections in some states more than others, but I don't want to give the impression that I don't experience trans hatred and violence regardless of where I go. That's not true.
Well, Danielle, I want to thank you for being our speaker and presenting to our community. Yeah, I know we went a little off of what the talk title was for the first half, but I want to thank you for introducing our community to that topic and for opening your time and heart to everyone here. So I'm going to end the recording right now. You can hang out as long as